The desert breathed heat like a restless beast, its winds dragging fine sand across the silent plains of New Mexico. Ethan Carter was a man carved by that same wind. At 40, he stood tall and broad-shouldered, his posture steady like an old fence post that refused to fall. His face was angular, marked by deep lines earned from years squinting into harsh sunlight, and a short, unkempt beard clung stubbornly to his jaw. His sandy brown hair, streaked faintly with gray, spoke of time passing faster than he ever intended. Once he had been a man who laughed easily, but grief had sanded that part of him down. 3 years earlier, his wife, Margaret Carter, a gentle woman with soft auburn hair and warm, patient eyes, had died from a sudden fever. Since then, Ethan had grown quieter, not bitter, just hollow in places no one could see. He lived alone now in a weathered wooden cabin near the edge of Apache territory, where most men wouldn't stay even if you paid them in gold. The locals in the nearest town called him stubborn, some called him touched in the head. Ethan called it peace. The land didn't ask questions, it didn't remind him of what he'd lost. It simply demanded work, and in that work, he found something close to silence. His only companion was a 6-year-old ranch dog named Rusty, a lean, dust-colored mutt with one torn ear and sharp amber eyes that missed nothing. Rusty had the kind of loyalty that didn't need words. He followed Ethan like a shadow with a heartbeat. That August morning, the sun rose already angry. Heat shimmered above the ground as Ethan rode out to check a broken stretch of fence near Copper Canyon. Rusty trotted alongside, pausing now and then, nose to the wind. Then, without warning, the dog froze. His ears lifted. His body stiffened. Ethan noticed it immediately. Rusty didn't spook without reason. Then he heard it. A sound so out of place it didn't belong to the desert at all. A faint, broken moan. Soft, human, and unmistakably desperate. Ethan's grip tightened on the reins. For a moment he said nothing, as if speaking might make the sound disappear. The desert held its breath with him. Somewhere beyond the red rocks, someone was alive, and barely holding on. The sound did not come again, yet it lingered in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Ethan dismounted slowly, boots pressing into the hot dust as Rusty moved ahead, nose low, tracking something unseen. The dog let out a quiet whine, not fear, but urgency. Ethan followed, weaving between jagged red rocks until he saw her. She lay half-curled in the narrow shade of a boulder, as if the earth itself had tried to shield her and failed. The girl could not have been more than 20. Her name, he would later learn, was Lila Greyhawk, but in that moment, she was simply a fragile figure caught between breath and silence. Her long black hair, tangled and matted with dust, spilled across her shoulders in uneven strands. Her skin, a warm copper tone burned darker by the sun, was stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, her lips cracked and bleeding. There was a stubborn strength in the shape of her face, something unbroken beneath the exhaustion. Her dark eyes opened as Ethan stepped closer, wide, alert, and filled with a fear so deep it had learned not to scream. She tried to move but failed. Her left ankle was swollen badly, twisted at an unnatural angle, and dried blood marked a cut across her forehead. Rusty stopped a few feet away, sitting down instead of advancing, his tail still, his body lowered in a silent signal, not a threat. Ethan noticed that. Animals understood what men often complicated. He raised both hands slowly, keeping his rifle behind him. Easy. Easy now, he said, his voice low, steady, though he knew she wouldn't understand the words. Tone mattered more than language out here. Lila flinched anyway, her breath catching sharply as she pressed herself further into the rock. For a brief moment, Ethan saw not a grown woman, but someone much younger, someone who had learned too early that strangers meant danger. His mind moved faster than his body. Apache territory, a young woman alone, injured. This was wrong in every possible way. Somewhere, not far, there could be riders searching for her, and if they found him here, kneeling beside her, there would be no time for explanations. No mercy, no questions, just the swift judgment of men shaped by years of bloodshed. He had seen what both sides did to each other. The desert did not forget, and neither did the people who lived upon it. For a second, the simplest choice rose in him like a cruel whisper. Walk away. Leave her to her own people. Pretend he had seen nothing. Live. But then she looked at him again, not with trust, not yet, but with something quieter. A thin thread of hope stretched tight across fear. Ethan exhaled slowly, reaching for his canteen. He took a drink first, deliberately, then crouched and set it on the ground between them, sliding it gently across the dirt before stepping back. Rusty mirrored him, backing away, sitting again. The girl's eyes locked onto the canteen as if it were the last thing anchoring her to life. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, hesitation battling desperation. Then, thirst won. She drank in quick, uneven gulps, water spilling down her chin, her shoulders shaking, not just from weakness, but from something breaking loose inside her. Ethan watched in silence, something tightening in his chest. He moved closer again, slower this time, pointing to his own ankle, then to hers, mimicking concern. "Let me see," he murmured. Lila hesitated, studying him with a sharpness that did not belong to someone so exhausted. There was intelligence there, instinct, a lifetime of lessons about survival. Trust could kill just as easily as it could save. Finally, she did not pull away. Her ankle was worse than he had hoped. Not just sprained, likely fractured. She wouldn't walk, not today, maybe not for weeks. Ethan sat back on his heels, staring out across the endless stretch of desert, his jaw tightening. He didn't need to say it out loud. The truth stood there beside him, clear as the sun overhead. If he left her, she would die. If he stayed, he might too. Rusty shifted beside him, pressing lightly against his leg, as if offering the only vote that mattered. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, and when he opened them again, the decision had already been made. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace that tested not just the body, but the will to keep moving. Ethan lifted Lila carefully onto the saddle, positioning her in front of him so her injured ankle wouldn't bear weight. She tensed at first, her body stiff as dry wood, but exhaustion dulled her resistance. Up close, he could feel how light she was, too light for someone her age, and how her breathing came uneven, like a flame flickering in the wind. He mounted behind her, one arm steadying her without gripping too tightly, as if afraid she might break. Rusty circled once, then fell into step beside the horse, his tongue lolling in the heat, but his eyes alert. They rode northeast. Ethan wasn't guessing blindly. Years on this land had taught him how to read its quiet language. The faint direction of old tracks, the pattern of worn trails between rock formations, the memory of stories traded between ranchers, all pointed toward the mountains where Apache bands were known to camp. Still, knowledge didn't make the journey safer. Every mile carried the same question. Would they be seen before they were understood? Behind him, Lila shifted slightly. Her fear had not vanished, but it had changed shape. She no longer flinched at every movement. Instead, she watched, studied. Her dark eyes tracked Ethan's hands, the way he guided the reins, the way he slowed the horse over uneven ground to spare her pain. When he spoke, soft, low, steady, she didn't understand the words, but she understood the rhythm. There was no cruelty in it, no edge, just a quiet persistence, like someone trying to keep a fragile thing from falling apart. Ethan rationed the water carefully, tilting the canteen to her lips first before taking a smaller drink for himself. Hunger showed in the way she accepted a strip of dried beef, chewing slowly at first, then faster, as if her body remembered what it meant to need. Each small act, simple and practical, stitched a thin thread of trust between them. By mid-afternoon, the land began to change. The open desert gave way to rougher terrain, steeper ridges, deeper shadows, places where men could hide without being seen. Ethan felt it before he saw anything. The silence sharpened. Birds were absent, even the wind seemed to hesitate, Rusty noticed too. The dog's gait slowed, his ears pricked forward, his body lowering slightly as if the ground itself had grown dangerous. Then they appeared. 3 riders stood on a mesa to the east, no more than 200 yards away, and they hadn't approached, they hadn't called out. They simply watched, motionless against the sky, like figures carved from stone. Ethan's heartbeat thudded heavy in his chest, but his hands did not move toward his rifle. He knew better. A single wrong gesture would end everything before it began. He slowed the horse instead, raised one hand slowly, palm open. Peace. Behind him, Lila suddenly drew in a sharp breath. Her body shifted forward, and before Ethan could react, she called out, A string of words in Apache, urgent, desperate, alive with recognition. The sound cut through the stillness like a crack of thunder. One of the riders moved. He came down from the mesa with controlled speed, his horse sure-footed over the loose rock. As he approached, Ethan saw him clearly. The man was older, perhaps in his early 50s, his build lean but powerful, like something shaped by endurance rather than strength alone. His face was hard, lined deeply, with a jagged scar running from his left temple down to his jaw. A mark that spoke of battles survived, not avoided. His hair, black streaked with gray, was tied back loosely, and his eyes were dark and sharp, the kind that measured a man before deciding if he was worth a second glance. This was Tomas Greyhawk. Lila's voice broke as she spoke again, her tone shifting from fear to something rawer, relief. The man's expression changed in a way that no enemy could fake. The hardness didn't disappear, but it cracked just enough for something human to show through. Ethan dismounted slowly, careful, deliberate. He lifted Lila down with both hands, supporting her weight so her injured ankle never touched the ground. She reached toward Tomas before her feet even settled, and the man closed the distance in 2 long strides, catching her, holding her with a force that spoke of something deeper than words. For a moment, nothing else existed. Then Thomas looked up. His gaze met Ethan's, and in that silence, the desert waited to see what kind of men they truly were. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the land in fire as Ethan rode home, carrying silence heavier than any burden he had known. He left the Apache camp with no ceremony, no promise spoken aloud, only a single nod exchanged between men who understood that words were often weaker than actions. Tomas Greyhawk had listened as Lila spoke, her voice steady despite exhaustion, recounting the story in her own language, pointing at Ethan, at her ankle, at the canteen that had kept her alive. Tomas had said little in return. He was not a man who offered trust easily. Years of war had shaped him into something precise and guarded. The scar on his face was not just from steel. It was from betrayal, from treaties broken and kin lost. Yet when he looked at Ethan, there had been no immediate hatred, only judgment. And judgment, Ethan knew, could turn either way. The ride back felt longer. Rusty kept close, glancing behind more often than before, as if expecting shadows to follow them. Ethan said nothing. His thoughts moved in quiet circles. Had he done enough? Had he done too much? Out here, the line between right and fatal was thinner than a blade's edge. He thought of Margaret, of what she would have said, and the answer came without effort. She would have smiled that soft, certain smile of hers, the kind that made hard choices feel less lonely. As the final ridge came into view, Ethan slowed his horse, then stopped. 7 riders stood in front of his cabin. They were arranged with unsettling precision, their horses aligned like silent sentinels. Even from a distance, Ethan could see they were not ordinary men. Their posture was too composed, their presence too deliberate. Rusty let out a low growl, not loud, but enough. Ethan's hand instinctively shifted toward his rifle, then stopped halfway. No. If this was death, it would not be avoided by fear. He urged the horse forward at a steady walk. As he approached, details sharpened. Among the riders stood Thomas Greyhawk, unmistakable, his scar catching the last light of the sun. Beside him was another man, older, broader, with long silver-threaded hair falling past his shoulders. His name, Ethan would soon learn, was Samuel Red Elk, a respected elder of the band. Samuel's face was weathered like carved stone, his eyes deep-set and calm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen generations rise and fall. Unlike Tomas, whose presence was edged with tension, Samuel radiated something steadier, measured, deliberate, a man who weighed decisions carefully and carried their consequences without complaint. Bundles were tied behind several saddles. 2 strong young horses stood tethered near Ethan's corral, their coats glossy even in the fading light. This was not a war party, but it was not harmless either. Ethan dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a dull, final sound. Rusty remained close at his side, silent now, watching. Tomas stepped forward. For a moment, neither man spoke. The air held still, thick with everything that could go wrong. Then Thomas broke it. "You brought my daughter back," he said, his English rough but clear, each word deliberate, as if placed carefully to avoid being misunderstood. Ethan nodded once. She was hurt. Anyone would have done the same. Tomas's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in quiet disagreement. No, he said. Many would not. Samuel Red Elk stepped forward then, his movement slower, but no less certain. He studied Ethan in a way that felt different, not searching for weakness, but for truth. A man shows who he is, Samuel said, his voice low and even, when no one is there to see him choose. Ethan didn't answer. There was nothing to add. Tomas gestured to the horses, the bundles. These are from our people. For what you did. For what you risked. Ethan's gaze shifted to the gifts. Fine hides, woven blankets, dried meat, tools crafted with care. More wealth than his ranch had seen in years. But Thomas wasn't finished. We ask to cross your land when we hunt, he continued. We take nothing that is yours. We give our word. Samuel added, and if trouble comes to you, it will not come alone. Ethan understood. This was more than gratitude. This was a bridge. He looked at them both, then gave a single nod. You'll have no trouble from me. It was not a grand speech. It didn't need to be. Some agreements were stronger when left simple. As the last light faded, the riders turned, disappearing into the growing dark as quietly as they had come. Ethan stood there a long moment after they were gone, the weight of what had happened settling slowly into place. Rusty nudged his hand. Ethan exhaled, long and steady. In a land built on division, something impossible had just begun. Autumn came quietly, not with color, but with a softer wind that no longer burned the skin. The change in Ethan Carter's life did not arrive like thunder. It settled in slowly, like dust after a long ride, almost unnoticed at first until it was everywhere. The days returned to their familiar rhythm, mending fences, checking cattle, fixing broken boards that seemed to give up faster each season. Yet something beneath that routine had shifted. The silence no longer felt as empty. It carried a presence now, unseen but undeniable. It began with small things. One morning, Ethan found a deer carcass hanging neatly from the outer fence post, already cleaned, the cuts precise and efficient. No tracks led away, at least none that Rusty could follow clearly. Another time, after a violent night storm tore through the plains and snapped part of his corral, he woke to find the damage repaired. Not roughly, not hurriedly, but with a level of craftsmanship better than his own. Whoever had done it had worked in darkness and left before dawn, asking for no acknowledgement. Rusty, now 7 years old, seemed to understand before Ethan did. The lean, dust-colored dog had grown calmer, less restless at night. He no longer barked at distant movements beyond the fence. Instead, he would sit quietly, ears flicking as if recognizing something familiar in the dark. Weeks passed, then months. The land around Ethan's ranch became untouched. That was the only word for it. Travelers still passed through, but none lingered with bad intent. Word had spread in ways that no man could trace. One afternoon, Ethan saw proof of it with his own eyes. 5 riders approached from the south, men with hard faces and careless posture, the kind who treated other people's land like an opportunity rather than a boundary. Their leader was a broad man with a thick black beard and narrow eyes, his movements slow but predatory. His name, as Ethan would later hear, was Caleb Rourke, a drifter known for taking what he wanted and leaving nothing but silence behind. Ethan watched them from his porch, rifle resting across his lap, not raised, not yet. The men slowed as they neared the edge of his property. Then something changed. Caleb's gaze shifted past the ranch, scanning the ridgelines. His posture stiffened. He said something to the others, low, urgent. The group began arguing in tight, clipped voices. Then, without warning, they turned their horses and rode away. Fast. Ethan didn't move for a long time after that. He didn't need to follow them to understand. The protection promised had not been empty words. It was watching, waiting, present. Not long after, Lila returned. She did not come alone, nor did she come close at first. Ethan spotted her at a distance near the far ridge, riding beside Tomas and another woman he did not recognize. That woman, Elena Whitebird, appeared to be in her late 30s, tall and composed, with long dark hair braided down her back and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed little. There was a quiet authority in her posture, someone who understood both healing and survival. Later, Ethan would learn she was a healer among her people, a woman who had seen enough suffering to treat pain without flinching, yet had never allowed it to harden her. Lila looked different, stronger. The fragility that once clung to her was gone. Her posture was upright, her movement steady, but it was her eyes that told the real story. When they met Ethan's across the distance, there was no fear there now, only recognition, and something quieter. Gratitude, yes, but also respect. She raised her hand slightly, not a wave, not quite a gesture, just enough. Ethan tipped his head in return. No words passed between them. None were needed. Seasons continued to turn. The story of what had happened spread across the region, carried by traders, by whispers in town, by men who spoke too loudly and those who spoke not at all. Some called Ethan a fool, others called him worse. A man who sided with Apache was not easily forgiven in certain circles. But there were those, quiet, thoughtful, who saw something else, not betrayal, not weakness, courage. Ethan never defended himself, he never explained. He simply lived the same way he always had, guided by something steady inside him that didn't bend easily to fear or opinion. Years later, when time had worn his body thinner and softened the sharp lines of his face, people would still speak of the rancher who chose to help when it would have been easier to walk away. They would speak of the strange peace that followed, of the invisible line drawn around his land that no harm seemed to cross. But Ethan himself never thought of it that way. To him, it had always been simpler. A girl was dying, he chose not to let her, and in that choice, something far greater than either of them had taken root. Somewhere between fear and kindness, a man made a quiet choice, and the world around him shifted in ways no one could have predicted. Not every moment in life arrives with certainty. Sometimes it comes disguised as risk, as discomfort, as a choice that no one else will see or understand. And maybe that's where something meaningful begins, not in grand gestures, but in the small decisions we make when it would be easier to turn away. Out there, in the vast silence of the desert, one act of compassion didn't erase the past, didn't end the conflicts of the world, but it softened something. It reminded people on both sides that beneath all differences, there is still a shared thread of being human. And perhaps, in our own lives, we are given moments like that too. Quiet crossroads, unnoticed chances to choose a little more patience, a little more courage, a little more kindness than the situation seems to deserve. So what would you do? If this story stayed with you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Someone out there might need to hear your voice today. And if you believe in stories that remind us of the good still left in this world, consider subscribing and sharing this with someone who could use a little hope. May God bless you, watch over your path, and bring peace to your heart wherever you are tonight.